loneliness, a little bit of disregard, handful of complaints, but I can't help the fact that everyone can see these scars. What I want you to want, what I want you to feel, but it's like no matter what I do, I can't convince you to just believe this is real.
So how do we reduce our carbon footprint so that we can, best show up for our players for generations to come?
I can't feel the way I did before. Don't turn your back on me. I won't be ignored. Time won't change this damage anymore. Don't turn your back on me. I won't be ignored. I can't feel. Don't turn your back on me. I won't be ignored. Time won't change. Don't turn your back on me. I won't be ignored.
I'm good, Peter. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thank you. I'm really stoked for this one. I think we've got so many different things to explore and avenues to kind of go down that it's going to be a really interesting podcast. Before we dive into it, let's start with a little bit of who you are, what you do, and why.
Yeah, sure. My name is Jeffrey Burrell. I am head of social impact at Riot Games. I've been here for about 9 years now. And what that entails is everything from like our Rioter giving programs where we'll match donations for rioters to our in-game activations where players can purchase items through one of our games to support social impact causes around the world, and now sustainability. So how do we reduce our carbon footprint so that we can best show up for our players for generations to come?
Amazing. So let's maybe start by talking a little bit more about sustainability and your social impact fund to maybe give like a holistic viewpoint to people that haven't had the fortune of coming across the amazing work that you're doing.
Sure. So, we started this social impact fund, as we call it, the Riot Games Social Impact Fund, in 2019. And the purpose was to really kind of expand out our footprint on how we can best support players for the causes that they care about anywhere in the world. And so since then, that's like where we support all of our in-game fundraising activations and supporting that. And we actually just recently crested $50 million raised by players since the inception. So we crossed that threshold, which kind of just boggles my mind when I kind of take a step back and think about it. But that's through the generosity of our players and goes to support primarily the causes that they themselves care about in the regions where they live.
Amazing. I remember watching the presentation that you gave a little while ago about the specific detail behind some of the work that you did. So maybe if we could talk a little bit about how Riot is utilizing the SDGs in respect to the impact that you drive your player community and the values that you're providing as well.
Yeah. So this was a pretty challenging puzzle for a while because one of the areas we really tried to hone in on as a company is being player focused. And that means a lot of different things, but really it means meeting players where they are and caring about what they care, because we ourselves are players. We want to care about that too. And when it comes to areas like social impact, for instance, it's pretty broad. A lot of people want to show up and give voice and give support to the issues that they care about. But one of the problems I kept running into was, how do you actually find out what players care about? Because what matters to us here in Los Angeles could be really different than people in Dublin, which could be really different for people in Turkey and Korea, including Brazil. And so what we needed was essentially like a unified framework so that we could talk about social impact and values across borders, across languages, and across cultures. And that's really where we found then the magic of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, to be able to give us that set framework so that we could go out, we could ask players, we could talk to them, we could survey them, and we could co-create with them so that we know what matters to players in Brazil is similar, but also really different than players in the United States, for instance. And so that's how we kind of use the SDGs to sort of then influence what nonprofits, what charitable causes we specifically aim to target and support in all of the regions where we as a game company operate.
Talking about like target and support, what are some of the the touch points, the data sets? What's been the key points of identification that have led to some of these partnerships that you've established? And I guess like also from a regional perspective, how does this differ between nations?
Yeah. So that's where it gets like really interesting. And I love data. Being informed by it, you can't always be driven by the data, but you can use it to then test your own theories and hypotheses. And so what we found over the years is we've been able to actually really unpack a lot more on when players talk about like a particular issue, what do they really mean? And so I'll give you one example that really came to light for us was we've noticed for a couple of years a trend growing around well-being and good health. And when we dove into that, we were asking players all over the world, what do you really mean by that? Is that public health? Is it personal fitness and well-being? Is it mental health? And the response we got from players was really outstanding by a large margin. Players all over the world, even in regions where it was still considered taboo, noted that mental health was really important to them and mental well-being. And when we kind of cross-tabulated that data with the World Health Organization, we actually found that it wasn't a gamer thing. It was a young person thing. And that rising levels of depression and anxiety and anxiousness all over the world have really been increasing. And so that's how we were able to kind of like find some insights into, okay, then what as we as a game company could do to help players where they are, help the communities that we're a part of to find better access and care, to start to break some of the stigma around reaching out for mental health, and then really trying to provide new on-roads for other content creators so that they can start talking with their own gamer communities about their own struggles, about how to find help, and about what it takes to live a well-balanced life. So that was some of the insight that we got from specifically understanding this data year over year. And we've also seen some really increased, like education is one of the top issues all over the world. That and sustainability we see consistently in the top 5 goals in every region where we do our research.
And in respect to the research, firstly, how is it different from the years that you've undertaken, the various different levels of research that you've done? And equally, some of the projects that you're most proud of, I guess, like who have you partnered with, and what's the direct impacts and implications that you've seen from the work that you've done as a company?
Yeah, so I'll address some of the trends that I've seen. It's funny when I took this job, I wasn't really thinking about, okay, well, here's how we're going to address like all of the ills of the world. We wanted to be really kind of like strategic on where we focus, on how we can have increased leverage on the areas that we want to lean into. And what I've seen over time is pretty remarkable in terms of what the world has been going through. Global pandemic, didn't see that coming. That was new. And all of it seemed like every year these like unprecedented issues have been like really sort of popping up. And we've seen that reflected in some of our research as well. Some regions, you see a growing trend of just no poverty. They're going through some pretty hard economic times over the years. And you've seen like this increase where people just want a chance to get a well-paid job or to get a chance at education. Likewise, we've seen some growth in sustainability, particularly in Western regions where it's becoming much more pronounced, much more kind of like top of mind. And mental health, like I've talked about, the pandemic was really hard for ways that people are still trying to understand in terms of loneliness, in terms of connecting with others, building those relationships. And so that's what we've also kind of like been seeing a trend in growing times as well.
That's looking outwardly, but looking inwardly in respect to Riot as a whole, like what have been some of the findings that you've done from the internal work?
For internal, what we do is we have a completely separate, this is funded by Riot Games as a corporation, not with any player money, but we have a donation matching platform. So if I've got some people that really want dogs, other people who really want to support cats, and I've got the iguana folks over there, I'm here to support and to amplify the impact that they make. We have seen then over time where issues that really become pronounced for rioters are also driven typically what you see in the headlines. And so that's where it's like, hey, this particular law, this particular ruling, this particular outcome, disaster, what have you, has happened. And so then we activate them with 2x donation matching. So all of a sudden, if you were to donate $10, for instance, that would become 30 to the organization that you're wanting to support. So that's kind of how we aim to do that with our internal rioters. And we honestly, as you can imagine, the world's in a pretty tumultuous place right now. So the ability for people to mobilize, to show gratitude, to show appreciation has been tremendously impactful. The coolest trend I have seen is that we're getting more percentages of people donating at higher levels, which is pretty remarkable to see.
What do you think of the wider implications as to the games industry as a whole? Do you think that people are taking note of what Riot are doing and wanting to follow suit, or do you think that it's something that you as a company are going to have to drive yourself from a movement perspective?
No, I don't really think of it like that. I would be delighted to trade notes with anybody. I furiously scan what other companies are doing, try and get good ideas, connect with whoever the counterpart is over there, and just talk about like a rising tide for all boats. Because I think the games industry is really uniquely poised. And for a long time, I think we were behind the other forms of entertainment in terms of social impact and sustainability. But that is growing at such an exponential rate of not only just, hey, here's a way for people to get engaged, but like I said, we can co-create with our fans, with esports, everything that we're wanting to do together. And these are highly passionate, highly engaged, highly people who want to see and demand that the world is a little bit better. And that to me has been really kind of interesting to see, because as the games industry begins to develop and evolve with these together, we can actually see a lot of areas of co-partnership with other game studios that we might not be able to do ourselves. Just one example. But if we get the whole industry to start to focus in and hone in on some of these things, then that is going to be like a tremendous source of influence. And honestly, I think like soft power coming in the future, because you've got, people older than my grandpa, policy making positions who don't really understand anything about games. But as young people begin to get more involved, as gamers start to get within the White House, or they'll start to see that games are going to be like a pretty important way to start engaging with people on social issues that kind of have grassroots effects for them.
Yeah, I always look at the holistic viewpoint. So if you look at the games industry, I think in 2022, it was estimated that the industry was worth around $350 billion US. And if you look at the wider opportunity we have from finance, and then you also look at the opportunity for progressive partnerships, that coming together to me just kind of makes sense, whereby the games industry, rather than kind of wait for change to be put upon an institution, it's actually, let's just lead the period of change together. And in that respect, you can do a whole host of things, from a percentage of the total revenue share. So even if you take like 1% of your annual revenue, that a sum of money would be able to go into a pot that they could then align to any one of the 17 SDGs, alleviate that problem. And then we move on to the next problem. And through slow but sure progressive change and partnerships, we start chipping away at some of these world's most pressing problems that we face. Because I guess we can all talk a good talk, but ultimately it comes down to action. And I think that the actions that you are driving speak volumes of your company, because there's that whole saying about good brands create moments, but great brands create movements.
That's very kind of you to say that. I think you're hitting on where my long-term target is, because it's one thing for a game company or any company donate time, donate resources, etc., to make a difference on an impact. It's another if we can get I think it's like 3 billion players around the world. 3 billion people play games. If we can all mobilize them just a little bit to give a damn about something, to get them to say, I'm going to take action on this. I'm going to give my voice, my ability to try and work on what I can in front of me. That is real social change. And the research is clear. That's what people want. They want to align with companies that share those values, that help them to kind of create this social movement together. And that is something I think the games industry can do that honestly no other industry can. We just have to figure out and to tap into that potential.
And I guess like when it came back to the early days of your social impact fund and the work that you were doing in respect to wider goals surrounding sustainability and the SDGs, how embracive and supportive was your kind of with the leadership team and the board in respect to the wider work that you were doing? Because to me, look, as an onlooker looking in, it looks like you've had that whole support from the very beginning, and that's allowed you to be empowered to create a culture of change.
Yeah, I will say that since the very beginning, Mark and Brandon are two co-founders. And even at the time, Dylan, who was then the CEO and is now the CEO, have been really supportive of these efforts. One of the interesting things about these sort of positions I've found, and after talking with other people, not only in my industry, but in others, is it's kind of the definition of entrepreneurship. No one will ever just kind of come in and say, cool, here's the whole team, here's the whole strategy, you're set up and off you go. You really have to find ways to partner with others in the organization to have those small yet strategic wins to prove concept, to develop ways that show real tangible, like not only business value, but then impact to the communities that you serve. And I can walk you through one example, like this year, we're just wrapping up our third player voting campaign. So like what I had talked about earlier, we select 3 hyper-local nonprofits in all of the regions where we operate. I believe this year is around 83 nonprofits that we're supporting. When I first had this idea, I had to start with just 3. And we had to be like, okay, we're going to go like 3 global nonprofits, and players get to vote and choose on those because no one's ever really done a voting activation like that before. So I had to prove that concept. That was such a headache. That's what led me to be like, okay, we got to start creating the social impact fund. It was out of necessity. So then the next year, we had Dark Star Cho'Gath, and that was the fundraiser. And that's how we said, okay, we'll do 1 nonprofit for each of the regions we're in. We knew we could do voting globally. Could we do that local activation? That was another year. It took the 3rd year to combine the 2 ideas into the ultimate vision that we had to go from 3 local nonprofits in each region. But it took 3 different campaigns, 3 years to build those muscles, to build those capabilities, understandings internally and externally to be able to do that. So it's kind of, everyone is really supportive, and Riot has been like, honestly, the best place for folks like me to do our best work. Anyone who is like kind of entrepreneurial can like really start to drive in on that. But you're having to figure out a way with little resources that you got.
From a campaign's perspective, can you maybe walk through some of the programs that you've been able to fund, and equally, how are you feeding that back to the player community? Because for me as a player, if I want to kind of see direct impact and for the work that I'm flagging, be it this charity that I'm particularly interested in that I'd like Riot to support, then how do I as a player get that information fed back to me to see the impact that I'm driving? Because in respect to like movements for change, you need that kind of constant feedback loop to allow for people to feel part of a journey. So how does that evolve and play out?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of ways, and admittedly, this is something I really want to get better at, and we're like kind of looking in the future to not just share back with players the impact that they've been able to create as a collective, but a lot of those personal stories, a lot of that closed loop where, hey, here's what you were able to do in Korea, for instance, right? Like build an entire gymnasium in Seoul, go visit it. Here's how you can volunteer at it. Here's how you can like start to enroll kids who you think might be a good fit. that's ultimately where I'd love to be able to get. Right now, what we do is really try to share back a lot of those key stories through our annual impact report and kind of like highlighting some of the impact that we have there. And we can do that at a macro level. And on the micro level, sometimes we'll like ask and get, testimonials, reports, lovely media that we can share back on those local channels. Ultimately, for every single project that we fund, through the social impact report, we ask for progress, like a progress report. We want to know that the money is, used well for impactful outcomes. We do a lot of research and like due diligence before we actually start to donate money or invest in particular projects. So we get all of those back. We're also a small team and we can only share back kind of like the broader collectives that we get as opposed to every single individual project that we support.
Yeah, definitely. What's been some of the biggest challenges and I guess also the opportunities that you've experienced throughout this kind of journey to where you are today?
One thing that was more challenging than I thought it would be was trying to get alignment into some of the approaches that we're taking. So what I mean by that is any you pick, half of the strategy is saying what you're not going to do. Like if you're looking at a high-end retail organization for luxury, you're not going to sell your product at like a Walmart or something like super cheap. But those are also very viable strategies as well. You can sell a lot of volume for a little bit of profit and both can be successful. When it comes to social impact, that I have found has been always a little bit challenging because what matters to people matters to them very dearly. And to say, no, this is actually what is in the best interest of the players, of the communities that we're trying to serve. I myself, very clear things that I deeply care about, but I have to remove that from my own personal desires to focus on what is best like for the players and with that strategy. Every time, that sort of comes up, we have that conversation and we go through it and then people get it. But it always like kind of takes that to sort of like ask, like, for instance, my brother is diabetic, deeply matters to me. I grew up with watching him having to take insulin, as much as I care about that. And as much, I'm sure so many of our players are diabetics. Can a video game company really then human clinical trials and in insulin taking and everything like that? Probably not. We can go to support, we can find ways through all of that, but we really try to find meaningful impact that creates a lasting result because of our support.
I think like that ability to drive lasting impact is going to be the differentiation between companies that kind of do good versus companies that do great work. And I think that where we are now, like the SDGs provide a framework for people to follow, at least people to kind of have some form of vision and goals that they want to attribute to and align themselves with. But thinking more about the future, what is the 5-year plan in respect to what you want to achieve with this current outlook, and also how far do you think you could take this particular initiative?
Yeah, that's a big question. The first is I would love to be able to, now that you've hit 50 million, I'd love to be able to have players hit 100 million. I always like setting kind of aggressive yet achievable goals. But at the end of all of it, what I'd really want is to empower players, our whole community of people who play games, not even our games, but any kind of game, to really be the driving force for positive change in the world. I want them to feel like their voice, their contribution, their efforts, their attention matters. That if we can do that, and I use we entirely because it is a very collective effort. If we can do that, then I feel like we'll have made a really positive mark on the world. And gamers will actually feel tremendously proud that they're part of the gaming community and that games actually make it better to be able to like live in the world that we're all in. And so what does that look like? That looks like bringing them on the journey with us in terms of sustainability. There's a lot that we can do as a company, but then there's also a lot of sharing back what we learn, our approach, what's working well, what's not. What could players do? I don't want to like put the onus on them, but what if we all just dimmed our screens by 10%? How much would that actually then kind of lower our entire footprint as a community? So what we're looking at in the future is really looking at those ways that we can give players not only voice in terms of like the voting for the nonprofits in their local regions, but how do we then highlight their ideas, their projects? How do we start to like source some of those all around the world so that if just a player in your local community and you're like, hey, I have like this great idea that I think could help, how do we find those diamonds in the rough? How do we support them and enable them and get like other players to get activated and involved? That's where my ultimate dream will be, because then that creates sort of like this self-enforcing narrative on what it means to be a gamer. You're not just hanging out and cursing at people or whatever they think gamers are. That's not actually the reality. We want to show the entire world that being gamer is actually something you should really be proud of.
I think the last time I looked, and I'm sure the stats have probably changed now, but there's around, at the beginning of the year, I'm pretty sure there's around about 3.24 billion active players. So like if you look at that statistic as a whole and think, well, the volume of people that are playing games, the ability to enact positive change within their interests and also empower people to be part of this change journey with you, then we have an opportunity to really just change the landscape around us. And a lot of people look at the challenges that we face, and there's a lot. You get a lot of pushback to say that's too big a problem to overcome. But it's these kind of small, tiny gains, like the fact that when you started with just like 3 charities at the beginning, and now you're up to about like 83. The ability to grow and cultivate that engagement and that collective community, and also the partnerships. The partnerships are going to be key as to how you grow going forward in respect to this initiative, and also bring others on board in respect to the wider positivity, wider opportunities for change. And yeah, like I look at it and think, well, in respect to the opportunities that we could as a wider community of gamers, we look at it from a revenue basis and take a percentage share of total revenue and apply that into a central fund, and then from that allocate that out to specific charities. That's one model that you could do. Another thing is that you could take direct ownership over a specific SDG and just say, okay, let's focus on this for the next couple of years, and actually really invest heavily into it. If you talk about mental health, or if we talk about sustainability, or whatever the top 3 indicators may be for that particular year, the ability just to drill down into the root causes of that. The Surgeon General said at the beginning of the year that we live in an age of epidemic and isolation, and the ability to address that fact, to change people's outlooks upon the challenges that they may face, and also provide them new opportunities to grow, evolve, and develop. When a company takes ownership of this, then you lead in with empathy, and that's one of the core principles: the ability to empathize with other people's struggles and show them that we're not all the same, and we're motivated by very different things than what people may perceive. And again, that grows brand awareness, and that'll grow engagement. But further afield, it'll grow the important thing, which is the impact, like the lasting legacy that you leave behind. And that's why I was so encouraged about jumping on a call with you, because I think people need to be made aware of some of the amazing work that's happening in society today. We often get dragged into the mire of all of the negativity, but there is some amazing work taking place, and I think sometimes there's light that needs to be shined upon it.
Yeah, I think you bring up 2 really good points. And the first is, it's ironic, but the more people draw attention to the seriousness of social issues like sustainability, like all these things, the more attention that we draw upon it, the less empowered people feel to actually solve the problem, because it seems so big. It's like, what could I actually do when the world is burning and everything like that? And so I think you hit on something that is really important, but so often overlooked, is that to mobilize communities, you need to pace the work, pace the solutions at a rate that the community can absorb and adapt. So if we come out and saying like, hey, everyone, we're going to go like do all these things and be like really big and splashy, everybody likes that, but it actually doesn't translate into anything tangible to thinking of this like, oh, I can do this versus I say, hey, if you just show up on this day, bring in 5 canned foods or whatever it may be, right? Donate blood, these types of things that slowly, consistently will change a person's identity because it's no longer, oh, I should do these things. It switches to I do these things and this is part of who I am. And so things like in-game fundraisers, donations, showing up, organizations that you care about, slowly starts to shift how people identify with themselves and communities to see what they can kind of go and draw together. I think that's really important. That's often overlooked that you brought up. And then the second, sort of what you had talked about before, is this broader effort of like, how do I really focus on core issues of diving deep into something? And I think this is where a lot of companies also not necessarily get confused, but it seems like there's a little bit of a lack of identity because I think you can do both, but they're very different approaches. On one hand, like when we give money to nonprofits that players care about and we enable them and we vote for them, we do a lot of research to make sure that the organizations are credible, that they're going to use the money relatively targeted towards the efforts that we would want them to, that they can report on it cleanly. There's no corruption, all of these good things. I can't like deeply dive in and do research on 86 nonprofits or 83 nonprofits a year for that. On the other end, as a company, we have our 4 pillars that we deeply look into. And that's where we try to find organizations that strategically we can actually amplify beyond just time and attention. We can accelerate some impact. We can take risks with them that they might not be able to take themselves to create this outcome that is long lasting and really has maybe a year or maybe 2 years of runway for it. And saying like, hey, we're in this journey with you. Here's like, we're going to be a good partner and make sure that we see this outcome together. Those are very different approaches, and it takes a different type of essentially risk tolerance to understand the objectives that you want for each one. So I think those are really good points that you brought up.
Yeah, I'd love to know a little bit more about like the 4 pillars, because like obviously when this first started in respect to the work that you're doing, there has to be a close alignment to the company's values and beliefs. Otherwise it never takes place. Otherwise it becomes just, like one of the things that frustrates me about things like corporate social responsibility is it's looked upon as like a report that goes at the bottom of somebody's desk, or worse is when people kind of try and jump on in respect to the wider narratives that we're seeing take place around purpose at the moment. Like to me, purpose is the lifeblood of an organization, and it's the very beating heart of why you exist and what you attribute value to the communities that you serve. It's everything. It falls within every part of your organization. But to some people look at it as almost like an extension of CSR. And I think that outlook is key. We can only really see the types of work that you guys are doing by having support of our boards and leadership teams. And when you have that, then you have the ability to cultivate and grow. And like I look further afield, and my hope for what you guys are doing is more so about progressive partnerships for change. It's true about due diligence. It's hard to kind of do that on the 83, but you then have an opportunity to partner with like global charities and global organizations that have far-reaching networks that you could provide far-reaching impacts to and work in partnership with. And that it's kind of like breaking down those walls of competition. When people stop looking at competition as an indicator and start looking at collaboration and seeing, well, we're all part of this ecosystem that is the games industry. We all are here to create first and foremost to create great games for players, but secondly to provide value to our player community. And when you align those pieces of the puzzle together, then that's how great movements can take place. And I do think that a lot of people could take solace in the work that you're doing, but then equally think about how we can elevate it to look at some of the world's most pressing problems and go, well, let's be the generation that solves these rather than just perpetuates them.
I really like how you brought that up. When I sort of look around, I spend probably the first 3-4 months of this job just honestly doing a lot of thinking and research on where can games have a unique impact. What's special about games as a form of like entertainment, culture, social cohesion. And so I researched a lot of academic leading think tanks of what they were talking about. And that's how we really kind of came up with the pillars of focus that we did. They're pretty broadly, but they have a really specific hypothesis for each one. So education, for instance, you would think, okay, well, that makes like a lot of sense for like a game company. You know, their players may be a little bit on the younger side, going through school, all of these things. We actually found that games, like playing and learning, just go hand in hand. The idea of, imagine you're taking a math test and you're failing the questions half of the time, but you want to queue up again for the next one. You know, it's just like, I got this one. You know, like this is the one that I'm going to get. Like if you're having that much fun and you're at like the right level of balance to be able to get into the state of flow, all of these things, you can actually really accelerate someone's understanding. So that's why we're like, education is really critical because we can have a unique place to play. Likewise, citizenship is one of our other pillars. And this one is really interesting to me because how do we potentially nudge players in game and out of game to be better Samaritans? You know, there's one thing to say like, hey, I'm just showing up to play a game of pickup basketball, you know, with some people there's social norms that go with that. There's like kind of these, what's acceptable? How do we start to help and move and mobilize players to understand what good behavior looks like in and out of game? Mental health would fall under this kind of category as well, mental well-being. And then of course, opportunity, because what we found was that great ideas for games are everywhere, but the opportunity to create games and the knowledge in which to do so is not equally distributed. So what can we do to start to spread that out and make it much more equitable for everybody? And then lastly, sustainability. I think this is just so untapped within the games industry right now. We have like a long way to go to kind of like catch up and in particular, understanding what we as an industry can do collectively to help lower some of our carbon footprint. And one great way that we just started to activate this was we had a pretty strong activation with our Worlds tournament with League of Legends in Korea this year. We announced a partnership with AWS. So every water dragon, if you're not familiar, that was taken down during the tournament, we donated to water.org and raised $350,000 that we were able to donate just through players watching the game and being active participant and having like extra stakes involved. And then we also invited players to complete missions within the game. And so every mission that they completed activated a tiny little donation that ultimately turned into $1 million that we donated to Eden Reforestation Project. So we're kicking off a new project with them in Chimanimani, Mozambique, to create an entire new forest and landscape restoration project with them. And that was all because of the players. So there's so many ways that you could activate and engage them on ways that they want to spend their time anyways. And that I think is, to your point, noting that games can do something really specific and unique that other industries may not be able to tap into.
And do you think that that's going to be an opportunity for you guys going forward, more like in-game activation?
Yeah, I think so. I think that primarily is, you know, I'll be candid. I get about 3 to 4 nonprofits reaching out to me every week to want to be like, hey, it would be so great if I could uniquely support each individual project. And that's why we have like the social impact fund set up is because that's a tremendous amount of work. And so our team is small and we can focus then on like saying like, hey, collectively we'll raise and activate from the players. And then we'll go out of our way to find, like I said, those diamonds in the rough that really create outsized impact and that we could meaningfully contribute to. Because it's one thing to give $1 million to an organization that brings in, I'm making it up, like $2 billion a year, right? That's one thing. And I'm sure that's doing like really great work. And there's another to say like, hey, here's two people in a garage trying to start a nonprofit. It may not be the best idea to give them $1 million. We have to try and really find the ones that have the right capacity and alignment with the goals that we're trying to.
Bearing in mind the world that we're entering into is very much a changed, turbulent world for the foreseeable future, at least. How do you envisage how do you envisage the partnerships that you're going to create, the longevity of these partnerships, and also, I guess, like, how do you envisage Riot utilizing your voice and the ability to drive impactful change within society within a turbulent world? What are your viewpoints upon how that's going to play out?
Yeah, I would say that we all live in a world of unlimited need, but limited means and resources and attention. So unfortunately, I can't focus on everything that I would love to be able to focus on. Likewise, there's no shortage of people saying like, hey, you should look at X or Y or Z. And when I kind of scan the horizon, I really try to think about, number one, what really does matter to players, where they are, and how do I start to activate that as a whole, not just like a social media post or something like that, but really like as a whole. And then two, where can we actually uniquely play? And I think one of the things, sort of how I think about it, where can we help with sunlight? Where can we help water and good soil and like help some of these ideas blossom and grow? You know, there's a lot of things that we're working on internally at the company with our products and everything, but then there's a lot of ways that we could activate great ideas where they are and support them in the resources and the prototyping and the testing, gaining awareness. And one of the best examples I can think of in these in-game fundraisers, when we do the player voting campaign, we've actually had a lot of the nonprofits reach back out to us to show just a tremendous spike in traffic that they normally hadn't ever gotten before. And of those, people who continue to engage and to donate and to want to volunteer with them later on. So it's not just like the distribution of funding that players have raised, but the ongoing involvement and collaboration that they get from their local community players anyways. And I think that's something where I really want to like start to lean into a little bit more and find new opportunities to be able to connect players with local on the ground grassroots activations.
Well, I could talk to you all day. It's been an absolute pleasure. I guess, like, just to close out, what would your key and takeaway be for our audience in respect to, firstly, the work that you're doing and like the wider mission that you have in play, and also how they could drive impactful change within their own lives?
Yeah, you touched on it. It has to start with empathy. If people are wanting to get into this, or like companies, they see something, 70-80% of millennials and 90% of Gen Z want to buy a product that's aligned to their values. Oh, we need to do that. And then they just kind of phone it in. People smell that. It has to be authentic. It has to be based in empathy. And you need to understand, like, what is the unique value that you as an organization, that you as a team or an individual can have. And then how do you start to experiment around? Kind of got to be a little bit of a scientist and test out ideas. They could totally fail, and you have to be okay with that. But if you don't fail, then you're never going to actually like swing for the fences and learn to tap into how you uniquely provide that deep, tangible kind of competitive advantage that only your company can help lead the prospective industry on.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Peter. Appreciate it.